Welcome to the Superstar Communicator podcast. My name is Susan Heaton-Wright, a leading impact, speaking and communications expert. My aim is to show you how to make an impact so you will be heard, listened to and respected for career success. Listen weekly to the podcast and go to our website, superstarcommunicator.com. Hello everybody, this is Susan from Superstar Communicator. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you are keeping safe and well. We are now in a situation where people are beginning to return back to work. Either they've come back from furlough or they're working remotely, with some people going back into the office, but it being very strictly adhered to with the social distancing. Personally, I'm not fancying going back into an office, at least for the foreseeable future, particularly travelling on public transport, but other people might feel different to me. But the challenge now really is that there are going to be some of my listeners here today who are returning to work and they are working remotely, but there might be one or two people in the office. This is all different. If you've been following me in the last few weeks, particularly on LinkedIn, where I've shared a lot of content, but also with the podcasts here on Superstar Communicator, I have really been supporting you with resilience and the change in our lifestyles over the last few weeks. And I want to support you again by giving you some tips about literally the difference between virtual and in real life communication. I'm going to share 5 differences, and it's worthwhile you considering these, particularly if you are going back to starting to communicate virtually. I don't want you to miss out. I want you to be ahead of the curve. So, first of all, I would say about body language. Now, in real life situations, when we're in a meeting, when we are meeting a lot of people or we're presenting, we are able to see other people's faces. We are able to see their body language. We're able to see whether they're distracted by their mobile phones or whatever, whether they're bored. Yes, this can be a double-edged sword because on occasions we can get put off by them, particularly if they look distracted, when in fact there might be something else going on in their lives. However, that is not as apparent when you're in virtual meetings. Of course, if everybody's got their screen switched on, you can see whether they're looking at the screen, whether they are actually doing some work as well. So they're half listening, perhaps they're distracted by looking at their mobile phone or they're responding to emails. Those become quite obvious, don't they? But on the whole, we are not able to pick out those things in the same sort of way. So in a virtual meeting, in virtual communication, we have to be more aware of that. And in order to keep people engaged, we have to make sure that there are lots more things that we're doing, that we're asking more questions, that we are really encouraging people much more collaboration. So rather than saying this is what we're going to do, ask people what their opinion is and make sure that everybody does get that chance. And that's the other key thing about body language. Normally in face-to-face meetings, we can pick up if somebody wants to interject or they lean in slightly. There are lots of non-verbal cues that we get. We don't get those in the same way in virtual meetings and communication. Therefore, we need to be aware of that and make sure that everybody has had a chance to talk. So the second one is really thinking about distractions and attention spans. I've been doing multiple webinars in the last 4 months. Do you know what? It has been an absolute pleasure to meet people from all over the world that I've been able to share my expertise and experience with. One thing that I picked up very, very quickly was that people can very easily be distracted by other things. Mobile phones, emails pinging across, other members of the family, Wi-Fi not being good, workload. And they might half listen, in a meeting rather than being totally present. Now, I know that in real life meetings, people do fiddle about with their phones and things like that, and you can set the ground rules. But that's more difficult to do when you're in a virtual meeting, because you're not totally sure that can be that people are actually looking at their mobile phones. So what I would say, as a person that is joining in a virtual meeting and communication, that they try to make sure that distractions are switched off so that they can be fully present in the meeting or the conversation. Likewise, it's worthwhile considering attention spans, because they're much shorter when we're in a virtual world. As a rule of thumb, when I'm doing webinars, I would normally get some interaction every 4 minutes at the very least, whether it's a poll, whether it's asking a question that people chat to keep that engagement there. You would not necessarily have that in a real life world. In a meeting, you wouldn't be constantly asking those questions in the same sort of way. So it might be worthwhile, if you are doing a meeting or participating, or that you're facilitating, that you really think about the structure and how you can maintain people's attention. Another thing is fatigue, because it became quite apparent during the lockdown, quite soon on, that people got very, very tired from these constant meetings virtually, in a way that you don't have it in real life. I think that it's just focusing on a small area, which is your screen, and actually interacting, because plenty of people work on screens and they don't get this tired. It's the actual interaction and concentration on other people. So what I would say there is there a need for such a long meeting? Can you make the meeting shorter? Could it actually be a phone call instead, or an email? Does everybody have to be in that virtual meeting? Because it can free up their time. It can also free up their minds to prevent them getting tired. Another one is being memorable. Now, in real life, obviously, we are all able to make an impact with what we say on non-verbal communication as well. And it might be that some people are louder than other people, that might be that some people have got a very strong force of personality, and that doesn't necessarily translate that well into a virtual world. And that can be an advantage for people who are less forceful, particularly if it's well facilitated. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But there are things that you can do that can make you truly memorable. The content that you share with other people, your contribution in meeting, for example, if you keep everything very top level rather than going into too much detail, and being brief, so you will make more impact that way. Another thing to do is to make sure that you have that you use case studies or stories to make sure that people will remember what you've said, and you illustrate it in that way. This is something that I do a lot of when I'm doing virtual masterclasses and virtual live workshops on making an impact virtually. We go into a lot more depth in the content area. So the last thing is etiquette. It can be very, very easy when you're in a virtual world for everybody to shout over each other. In real life, yes, that happens, but because there's non-verbal cues, but with body language and gestures and facial expressions, we are able to pick up on those things. And if you've got a strong chairperson, that will make sure that it isn't absolute chaos. However, in a virtual world, unless you've got a strong facilitator, there are going to be problems in a meeting. And I would say that the facilitator needs to set some ground rules, such as people not talking over each other, using the chat, that you mute when you're not speaking, that people have the chance to speak for a certain amount of time, that contribution, all of those sorts of things, keeping the videos switched on, because that is really important. That's the way that this will work. Of course, if you have a well-run meeting in real life, you have to have some ground rules and etiquette. But equally, you need to be even stronger with that in a virtual situation. And I will finish with a post that I read. I'm not going to read it out, but there was a gentleman that said that during the lockdown, he had met up virtually with his friends, a group of friends, once a week for a Zoom call, and they would struggle to find enough to talk about for an hour. Yet for the first time they met in real life in the garden, socially distancing. After 4 hours, they were still talking to each other and didn't want to leave. This is the difference between real life and virtual, that in real life we are picking up many, many more dynamics with our gestures, facial expressions, body language, that we don't necessarily pick up in virtual meetings. But there are things that you can do that can bring them to life. And I hope that the tips that I've given you will be able to help you with this as you transition. Thank you very much for listening. This is Susan from Superstar Communicator. Bye-bye. You have been listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and on apps. Please contact us if you want to discuss any topic, could suggest a topic for us to include, or a guest who could come onto the podcast. Go to superstarcommunicator.com.